Good afternoon. I know that you all are hungry. How many of you all are hungry? Okay, and I know you all have been sitting here all morning, right? So we're going to have a little exercise before I begin. So how many of you are thinking about going to law school? Stand up. How many of you are worried about how you can pay for law school? How many of you are worried about whether you'll get the right LSAT score? How many of you are worried about getting into the school that you want to go to? How many of you are worried about being able to pay off debt if you have to get into it? Okay, so I'm here to tell you that you all can do it. I'm so glad that we're here to talk about it. And shake your arms a little bit, because I know that you need circulation. You've been sitting for like 3 hours, right? And move your legs a little bit. Okay, and sit down and we're going to talk. Give yourselves a round of applause for being here on a Saturday. I want to thank Sorestisha for that introduction. And it really is an honor to be here today. My husband and I have 2 young children. They are 4 and 6 years old. And when I told them that I was going to be flying to Boston, to Cambridge, to be here, my son said, well, what about my soccer game? And what about Hugh's birthday party and all that? And, well, can I go with you? And so I asked him, well, do you want to go with me or do you want to stay? He said, no, I need to stay for my soccer game, but you need to be back this afternoon. So I am actually flying back at 4 to be back with my kids. So I just want you all to know how important it is for me to be here with you. And I'm also glad that MasterCard, my employer, trusted me enough to say, hey, we need to sponsor this. And I outlined why, and they were okay with us doing that. And I also want to say to Evangeline Mitchell, I don't know if she's around, but we need to give her a round of applause for organizing this. These sorts of conferences did not take place when Lisa, who you'll hear from after me, and I were growing up and thinking about law school. And so, again, it's critically important that you're here. I'm sure you're learning a lot, and I'm just so glad and proud to be here. I also want to say that it's great to be here at law school, right? Harvard Law School. I have a couple of people in my village who graduated from this prestigious school. One is my cousin David Hackney, who thinks he's much smarter than I am because he graduated from here. And then the other is Congresswoman Terry Sewell of Alabama. She's the first black woman to represent Alabama in Congress, and she received her law degree from here. She and David were almost in the same class. I think they were a year or 2 apart. But they oftentimes talk about the days when they were here in the late 80s and 90s, early 90s, and they were part of protests because they wanted to see more diverse professors. They talk about the legendary Charles Ogletree, who I'm sure you all have heard of, and they call him Tree. And so they're very proud of this institution. But I'm also proud of the law school that I graduated from, and it's The Ohio State University College of Law. And I still tell Congresswoman Sewell that Harvard taught her well because her first chief of staff has a law degree from Ohio State. And so she is on the right path. She's on the Ways and Means Committee and the Intelligence Committee, and she's doing really well, and I'm proud to have helped her get started on her career in Congress. So I know I don't want to stand in the way of Lisa speaking and you all going to lunch, but I just want to talk with you briefly and take some questions on the back end, and give you a couple of points, 4 points, not 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10, but just 4. So one of them is, and you all have heard this, and you've heard President Obama talk about daring to dream, right? Having the audacity to dream, and then execute that dream. When I was about 7, I had a TV in my room, and I used to watch a show called LA Law. I don't know if you all have ever heard of it. It's not on anymore, but I'm sure you've heard of Blair Underwood. And so I used to sit on my knees watching TV because I had to be really quiet. I was supposed to be in bed. And I used to watch that show, which is why my children don't have TVs in their room and they won't. But I used to watch that show. And that's how I learned about law. and whether it was true or not, I learned about the importance of advocacy, the courtroom, the importance of a judge, the importance of having the right advocate. And then I grew up around advocates. My grandfather was a pastor. My mother was an elementary school teacher and then principal. My dad was a small business owner, and then he worked for General Electric, and he served in the Navy before I was born. And so I was around servers, public servants. And if you've heard of Shirley Chisholm, she has a quote that talks about what public service is the rent you pay for the price of living on this earth. And so I knew I wanted to be a lawyer. Couldn't really articulate why, but I did. And so as I was growing up, I tested myself, my lawyering skills, without having a law degree. And I presented a couple cases to my parents. One of them was I tried to convince my dad to stop smoking. I would take his cigarettes and hide them way above the cabinet. And then I presented this case about why he should stop smoking. Now, he says he stopped smoking because at work, I guess back in the day, you could smoke in your building, and then they banned that, and then they had to smoke outside. So he claims the first day he had to go outside and it was cold, he stopped smoking. So I don't think he'll give me credit, but I'm taking that credit. And then the second was, and this is totally TMI, but I was like 12 and I wanted a training bra. And they're like, you don't need a training bra. And so then I put on this case about why girls, you need that and blah, blah. And I won that case. And then the third case was, I went to public and private school, but started out in private, and I went to church with some friends who were in public school, and I wanted to be with them. I didn't want to wear a uniform every day, and you had to wear a skirt and then these gray or maroon colored socks. I wanted to be with my friends. And so I put on this case about why I needed to switch schools and go to school with my friends. Now, the problem is I won that case, but if you were to talk to my parents today, they would say that they regret that choice because I wanted to wear pants every day, I wanted to just do whatever my friends were doing, which there was nothing wrong with that, but they say they regret it to this day. And then the other issue is, in those cases, my parents were not only the defendants, but they were also the judges. So they would have overturned a few, right? But at any rate, I knew that I wanted to be a lawyer. So I say to you, just dream big. And my parents allowed me to go and shadow a lawyer in my hometown of Lorain, Ohio, growing up. And that was when I was in high school, so I had a sense of what lawyers do and what they don't do. And then later on, I went off to college at Eastern Michigan, where you heard. And so the first point I just want to reiterate is dream big, right? Have that audacity to dream big dreams. Your not yet dreams, right? Whatever it is, we're always operating in the not yet, right? We want to have this, but we don't have it yet. But keep dreaming and then put together your plan to get there. But in order to have that plan, you've got to be focused. You've got to be driven. You've got to be competent. You have to have sound character. And then you have to have capacity. I worked for a congressman once who used to say to me sometimes if I screwed up, you don't have the capacity today. What's going on with your capacity level? And I didn't understand what he was talking about until now. But those are critically important elements toward executing your plan. Because if you're not focused, then you're going to veer off, you're going to get distracted, and it takes you off from where you want to be. So dream big. The second point is to have a village around you. Develop your own kitchen cabinet. You saw that, Harvard Law's grad, President Obama had a cabinet, right? We won't talk about, any other cabinets, but we'll talk about his cabinet. His cabinet was diverse. His cabinet was awesome. His cabinet of folks really cared about our country. And so you too want to have a cabinet. You want to have a cabinet to talk about, should I go to law school? Shouldn't I go? I got into this school, but not that school. Should I buy a car? Shouldn't I get a car? You want to have that sort of cabinet. Should I date this person, not that person? Whatever it is, have your cabinet. And then know who's the head of your cabinet. If you are religious at all, know who is the head of your life at all times and remain centered and know who that is. And so, again, your cabinet's really important. As I was in college, I developed some mentors. I wasn't purposefully putting together the cabinet, but one of my poli-sci professors, his name is Dr. Michael Harris, he's now the head of public policy at Tennessee State. He said to me one day, you need to do an internship on Capitol Hill. So I talked to my parents about it, and then we ended up figuring out who our member of Congress was, or they knew, I just didn't know, and I did an internship in Washington, D.C., stayed at GW. My parents paid for it. And I recall going back home in their car, and I said, I'm going back next summer. And this brings me to my third point. It's to take risks. So as we were driving back to Ohio, my parents said, no, you're not going to go back next summer. This costs a lot of money. The Metro Pass, all this stuff costs a lot of money. And I kept saying, but I loved the energy. I loved what was taking place on Capitol Hill. And they just said no. And I said, okay. And I just tucked that away. Okay. So when I went back to school, I spoke with my professor about it, and then our dean of students, his name's Greg Peoples. I still keep in touch with him and his family to this day. And they all helped me figure out how to go back the next summer. So then I showed my parents, I am going back next summer, with or without you. And the school paid for it. Eastern Michigan University paid for it. And I got credit for both summers of internship experiences. And the first internship was with Congressman Sherrod Brown, who's now in the U.S. Senate, and he just won his re-election on Tuesday. And the second one was with Richard Gephardt. He was from Missouri. He had the position that Nancy Pelosi has right now. So I actually worked in the Capitol, in the basement, and just got to be in it, in the moment, and got to learn so much about how public policy works and how it doesn't work, and the role of an intern, too. So that was the second summer. And then I graduated a semester early. I took a lot of courses and just mapped out the courses I wanted to take and when. And then I told my parents I wanted to go back to DC before starting law school. And they were like, okay, your head is really in the clouds now. And I said, no, I'm going back. You didn't believe me the first time, but I'm going, And so I ended up going back, and that was through a relationship, through a lobbyist who I met while I was interning the very first summer on Capitol Hill. And we keep in touch to this day, and and he's still there. He works for a firm called Aiken Gump. And I got to work at Aiken Gump in DC. If you've heard of Vernon Jordan, the legendary Vernon Jordan, I learned from people like him. I floated around in different departments, namely the recruiting department, to learn about law firm life, especially large law firm life. What is that like? Are there people that look like us? How do you get recruited? Is law firm life what I want? How much do they pay? And then at that time, I was still deciding which law school to go to. Had to make a couple choices. Ohio State was on the list. Where my parents wanted me to go, Ohio State, right? I listened to them that time, only because I talked to lawyers there, first-year associates, second-year associates, who were saddled in debt. Now, my vision was to get back to DC, become some sort of lawyer, international lawyer, married by 33, kids, dog, the whole thing. And so I talked to some lawyers, and they said, you need to listen to your parents. They have in-state tuition back where you're from. You'll get back to DC at some point. And so I did. So they were happy about that. The assistant dean of admissions at the time, my parents actually called him and said, can you call our daughter and talk some sense into her, because she's not listening. My parents, I'm an only child, so, it's, and so, and I had one of the best experiences. Yes, law school is hard. Yes, it's challenging. But again, going back to what it takes, I had to focus, I had to study. I had to learn this new system. Law school is a system just like any other system. I had to learn the process. I had to learn how to write. I thought I could write, but until I got to law school. And you have to be willing to accept what you don't know and willing to adjust to that new system. And it's made me a better person. And so develop your kitchen cabinet. So develop your kitchen cabinet. Don't be afraid to take risks. And then be transformational. That's critically important. A lot of people now are transactional, right? They want this if you can give them that. Or we have to have so many likes in order for us to, And so that's not the way that transformation really works. I worked on Capitol Hill for almost 10 years. And the most recent position was with Congresswoman Sewell. And I can say that I had some amazing experiences learning about how you draft legislation and the sort of impact that you leave. And so when I worked for Congresswoman Sewell, if you all remember, in 1963, a church was bombed in Birmingham, Alabama, at the 16th Street Baptist Church. And so those family members of those 4 little girls have been feeling for years that the country has never apologized. Now they have this new congresswoman. They wanted her to do something about it. And that was at a time where the Republicans were in charge of both chambers. House and Senate. And we still said we want to have a congressional gold medal honoring the lives of these 4 little girls. President Obama was still in the White House. John Boehner was the Speaker of the House. And fortunately, John Boehner was willing to have different ceremonies that President Obama and others wanted to have in the Congressional Black Caucus. And so we ended up having to pass the legislation. It had to be bipartisan legislation to get this gold medal. And we did it. And we got to the end where we had to plan the ceremony, and it had to be scheduled. And we were being told, oh, we don't have time. And so I told Congresswoman Sewell to go up to Speaker Boehner and just say, John, I know you've had to schedule a lot of African American ceremonies, because remember, President Obama was president, but just please let us do this one. And so because of her position in Congress, I got to go with her down on the House floor every day, like literally every day. It was awesome. I mean, I carried my children while being on the House floor, like walking every day. It was amazing. And so she went down, and I was standing near her. So she said it, and then turned and said, Nichole told me to say that. And he scheduled it. He literally said, and so we had this ceremony where we brought in the families, and it was absolutely awesome. And that's what I mean by being transformational. We worked with Republicans to get it passed. We brought in family members, and it really was transformational. And so the gold medal, you can purchase a replica of it. You can see it at the 16th Street Baptist Church. And that's what I mean. And then in my role at MasterCard, I've been there 4 years now, I was recruited by a search firm to go there. And what I also learned being on Capitol Hill as a minority is that a lot of these search firms don't really recruit people like us. That's another system. And I knew that at some point I wanted to become a lobbyist, wasn't quite sure where, and I got a call about this job at MasterCard. And so I've been there 4 years now, and I'm one of few African Americans. The numbers are increasing tremendously under our general counsel, who's a graduate of Harvard Law. His name is Tim Murphy. But I knew from the beginning I had to be a beacon of light. And so I work in the public policy office in Washington, D.C. And the role of a lobbyist is that you represent the interests of your company in front of Congress. So that is tax reform, as Tisha mentioned. That is anything dealing with payments. With payments now, you can pay for parking through your phone, right? You have to have the Park Mobile app or whatever the app is here. You can pay for your bills, utility bills. You can pay tuition, right, using a card. And so anything that disrupts that is really important to us. Financial inclusion is really important to us, making sure that everyone has access to electronic payments, not just the few. And so breaking down those barriers and working with members of Congress to address those challenges, and then identifying the solutions. I was talking to a young lady from Georgetown. I think her name is it Bunmi? And she is from Ethiopia, and her family's from Ethiopia. And we were talking about some of the work that MasterCard's doing globally. So in Africa, different parts of Africa, there are certain pockets of communities where people don't even have a bank account. They don't have an ID. They put their money in boxes or under mattresses. And so we have business execs who go and work with governments over there to help them create an ID card and then a MasterCard on the back side. Now that's a contract, which you all will learn when you go to law school. Contracts can expire. And so when the contracts are up, they have to be renegotiated, and other companies can get it depending upon what the fee is. And then also at MasterCard, we have created some partnerships with some organizations that the execs at MasterCard probably never thought they would, work with. We work with the National Urban League now through relationships that I garnered on Capitol Hill. We identify issues, and we're working on developing some solutions. We work with Reverend Sharpton and the National Action Network. We work with the Latino Coalition. And so again, being transformational is really important. Don't just get these jobs and then just sit there and be happy to have them, or just be happy to have a check and you can buy yourself shoes and travel and whatever. You have to do more than that. Because at some point, if that's all you're doing, you'll lose your job at some point as well. And recognize by creating some of these new transformational things for companies, you're agitating them a bit too. Because I think sometimes when I go up to someone, they're like, uh-oh, here she comes. What does she want now? What should we do now? And in fact, when I first started, I asked my boss, there are nearly 50 African American members of Congress. We need to increase the contributions that we give to their political action committees. What are we going to do about that? And then he's like, well, here's some checks, actually. Let's get, And so, because that's the way that they get reelected. They can't side with us on everything, but companies have political action committees, and we can support them. And so, again, we're doing a lot. We'll keep doing a lot as long as I can. And the time is yours to learn from us and think about all the shoulders that we stand on. Think about people like Trayvon Martin, who can't be here right now, to be sitting here learning, right? Think about Ben Crump. Ben Crump often talks about, when you get those letters in the mail about serving on a jury, don't just say no because you have other things to do. Think about that defendant. Think about that plaintiff. Think about who needs help. Think about the judges. I saw some stat today about Texas, having more female judges who are just black female judges who were elected on Tuesday. And so think about those shoulders. Think about John Lewis, who marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and was beaten for the right to vote. So when you think about going to the polls and it's raining and you don't feel like going, go, because there are people who have fought for us to vote. Think about Johnny Cochran. Think about Thurgood Marshall. Look at some of his speeches. Look at some of his opinions that he wrote, or his clerk wrote, right? All of that's critically important. And so, I want to close with, saying that a couple of years ago, I took my son to the White House to go to the very last Black History Month reception. I could have taken my mother, and she reminds me of this still. You could have taken me. And I have the kind of son where if I take him somewhere, he will just take off because he wants to learn, he wants to see what's happening. We got there, he ended up going all the way to the front of the rope line. I was eating because I was just so happy they had some food. And so he got to the front, and I'm standing nearby. Next thing I know, he was standing up on the podium. Someone called the usher of the White House, put him up on the podium. He had a suit on and everything. And so he came back down. I couldn't really touch him. I was like, oh my gosh, what if he messes up? What if he, but I was near. And toward the end, the president came around and was talking with him. And there's a photo, if you Google my son's name, his name is Clark Reynolds, that Pete Souza took. And it's of the president trying to fix his tie. And my son is looking at him. And so Pete Souza was trying to figure out who's the parent? What's their story? Are they destitute? What's going on? And so some of my friends who worked at the White House, they're like, no, everything's all right. They're not living, but here's the parent. And so Pete Souza found my number. I guess my friend gave it, and he said, I have this photo. I want to give it to you. And he said, I took a couple of photos, and the president autographed it. And so the autograph says, Clark, thank you for visiting the White House or something like that, but dream big dreams. Work hard and you will achieve them. And that's what I want to leave with all of you. We are all living testimonies. We all have our stories. We all have our own backgrounds. Who knows what your background is, but some of us wouldn't be here if other choices had been made, right? And so make the best use of your life every day. Thank you for having me.